Amos. The book of Amos. Now, the prophet Amos, there's very little actually known about Amos other than he makes really good cookies and he's famous for it. Allegedly, this book was written around 765 BC. Amos was a shepherd, and he farmed figs. He had an orchard. And so, animal agriculture and orchard, very cool. He was from an area called Tekoa or Tekoa, which, if you're thinking of the northern and southern kingdoms, the house of Israel to the north, the house of Judah to the south, he was right on the border between these two areas. Contemporary of Isaiah and Hosea. This book is written or compiled because there's some debate, as usual, amongst the biblical scholars as to who wrote what when. But either this book was written by Amos after he was exiled, essentially. He's told to leave Beit El, Bethel, at one point because he's raising too much hell. The people don't want to hear the rich folks, the kings and the priests, imagine that, don't want to hear what he has to say. And so he's told to leave Bethel. And we'll get to that. And there's some conjecture and contention over, did Amos write this book after he was told to leave Beit El, Bethel? Or was this compiled at a later date based upon the oral traditions of Amos? We don't know because there's not the main body of work that we have, perhaps the only body of work that we have to learn about Amos is this book, Amos, and it's only 9 chapters. The chapters, it's kind of in 3 sections. Chapters 1 and 2 is considered the messages to the nations and to Israel for obvious reasons, which we'll see momentarily when we begin. Chapters 3 through 6 are considered messages to Israel and its leadership. And chapters 7 through 9 are Amos's vision. Now, new term that I learned. Doom prophecy. Amos and I guess many other prophets are considered to be doom prophets. That's fun. Because what he's saying in a nutshell is, y'all better act right or dad's going to come in here and he's going to start whipping your butts. What again fascinates me about Amos is that this book was written 40 to 45 years-ish pre-Assyrian exile. And so there was no frame of reference for the things that Amos was saying. He was 40 years ahead of the game. Probably a big part of why people didn't want to hear what he had to say. And again, he was 40 years ahead of the game, which gets into, we've discussed previously, some of these air quote prophets that are running around these days saying, in the name of Yahweh, it shall come to pass in 10 days. 10 days is unimpressive. There's artificial intelligence algorithms that can predict farther out than that. These guys were decades, if not centuries, ahead of the power curve, given visions by Elohim. And in some cases, millennia ahead of the power curve. So we're going to read the first portion, Amos 1 and 2 this morning, the messages to the nations and to Israel. And specifically in chapter 2, there's a fair bit of allusion in my reading, in my opinion, to the words of Yeshua. Imagine that. Or we could say that Yeshua, when Yahweh became flesh and dwelt amongst men, what Yeshua said, and I've said this myriads of times on camera, what Yeshua said was the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. Yeah, I'm convinced that I know that he taught Torah. That's obvious. If you know the Torah and you know the writings of Messiah, it's obvious. If you don't know the Torah, then it's not obvious. It was nailed to the cross. Please go read Colossians chapter 2. Like, actually read it with your own eyeballs in context. It was not. Doctrines and dogmas were nailed to the cross, and it wasn't a cross. It was a stake, a staros, but that's a different conversation. So Yeshua taught the Torah, and then he walked out the Torah perfectly because he's without sin. 1 John 3 verse 4. Sin is lawlessness. And then he also taught and preached the Psalms, Tehillim, the writings of David, the writings of King Solomon, the Proverbs, and then the prophets. He was very well acquainted with the prophets because he's constantly quoting them. And so some of what we see in Amos chapter 2, to me, which is a short chapter, 16 verses, reads very much so like something that Yeshua would say. And we'll get into the cross references. So let's begin in Amos chapter 1. The words of Amos, who was among the herdsmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake, which is they date the earthquake approximately 70 or 750 BC. Also note that he's a herdsman, he's a shepherd. He's not from a school of the prophets. He's not in the lineage of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of whom were related to one another. He's a guy. He's just a guy. And I like that he comes out of the gate and is like, hey man, I'm just a normal dude. I just run sheep. Again, Yeshua, the good shepherd. And he said, Yahweh roars from Zion and gives forth his voice from Jerusalem, and the pastures of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Damasek, and for 4, I do not turn it back, because they threshed Gilead with threshing implements of iron. But I shall send fire upon the houses of Hazael, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-Hadad. And I, Yahweh, shall break the bar of Damasek and cut off the inhabitant from the valley of Avon, and the one who holds the scepter of Beth-Eden. And the people of Aram shall go exiled to Kir, said Yahweh. Now, he resumes again in 6, so I try not to interrupt y'all when he's speaking, but since there's a little cadence here, we'll pause momentarily. Interestingly, verse 2, and he said Yahweh roars from Zion. That's interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is we know that Yeshua is of the tribe of Judah, Matthew chapter 1. And the Lion of Judah is a thing, right? It's a biblical concept. The lion roars. So that's the first thing. And don't get it twisted. I'm not a Jew. I don't recommend that you be a Jew. I'm a believer in Messiah who reads this Bible and does what it says, which is Hebrew stuff, not Jewish stuff. So we're commanded Old Testament and New not to take away from this word and not to add to this word. The Jews, the Yehudim, have absolutely added to the word. That's why Messiah is constantly and consistently rebuking the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the high priests, plural. There's only supposed to be one. There were 2 in the days of Yeshua because it became a political office. We don't do Jewish stuff. Doctrines and dogmas of men don't matter. Go back to read Colossians 2. We do Yah's stuff, biblical stuff. And so the Yehudim, the Jews, have taken the phrase Israel. They've taken ownership of the identity of Israel. Israel was a man named Jacob, who was then renamed Yisrael, Israel. And he had 12 sons that result in 13 tribes of Israel. Because Joseph, you have Ephraim and Manasseh. So, and it's the 12 tribes of Israel, typically referred to, because Levi, is not counted because Levi doesn't have an inheritance in the land. Their inheritance is service to Yahweh, which is pretty cool. Arguably, much better than a piece of land, even though a piece of land is a good thing. My point is, there were 13 tribes of Israel. Judah was but one of them. And to this day, the Yehudim, the Jews, have made the identity of Israel Judah-centric, to the point that the entire world's population, more or less, is confused. If you do things like read and keep the Torah, they say, oh, you're doing Jewish stuff. No, it's biblical stuff. It's just the Jews have claimed it as their own. It's not just theirs. In fact, Yahweh tells Abraham, your seed will be the esteem of all nations. And you can read in the Old Testament and the New, there is one Torah for the Israelite, not just the Jew, the Israelite, and the sojourner within their gates. 82 different nations left Egypt with the Israelites. That's the mixed multitude. And then, of course, in the New Testament, you see the good news, which is what? The kingdom of heaven is at hand, that the king is in the land, that Messiah is here. You see the good news go out to all nations. That's called the Great Commission, right? So the Jewish guy from Judea, Matthew chapter 1, commands that the good news, that the kingdom of Elohim, go out and be preached to all nations. Here's a question for you. The New Testament hadn't been written yet, so what verses, what scriptures were they using to preach the good news? How interesting. So, Yahweh roars from Zion, like the Lion of Judah. And then also, if we go to Revelation chapter 10, and we look at Revelation chapter 10, verses 3 and 4. Actually, we'll start at 1. But Bear, what about insert verse here from Revelation? I read all of the New Testament on camera. YouTube search bar, it's a thing, including Revelation. And I saw another strong messenger coming down from the heaven, robed in a cloud and in a rainbow on his head, and his face was like the sun, and his feet like columns of fire. Archangel Michael, Daniel 12, cross-reference. And having in his hand a little book, opened, and he placed his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. And when he cried out, 7 thunders spoke their sounds. And when the 7 thunders spoke their sounds, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, seal up what the 7 thunders spoke and do not write them. Cross-reference, Psalms 29 for the voice of Yahweh. Very cool, Psalms 29. Many people have asked, but how do I hear God? What does God sound like? Psalms 29. So, these 7 thunders and this voice from heaven, Yahweh, speaking from the throne room, and this archangel, a strong messenger, roaring like a lion. So there's biblical congruency here. Let's pick up Amos 1 verse 6. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Azah, and for 4, I do not turn it back, because they took into exile, an entire exile, to surrender it to Edom, the Edomites. But I shall send fire upon the wall of Azah, and it shall consume its palaces, and I shall cut off the inhabitant from Ashdod, and the one who holds the scepter from Ashkelon. And I shall turn my hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, said the Master, Yahweh. Philistine, Palestine. No, that's not how the etymology of that word works, Bear, don't you know? Go ask the Yehudim, I'll wait, who they identify as the Philistines. Then go ask the Palestinians, culturally, who they identify with, and their rich heritage and their historical backstory. I'll wait, regardless of what etymological arguments people try and make. So what's happening here? Basically, Yah is saying to all these nations, these are nations that directly surround Israel. He's saying, you didn't treat people right, and now I'm going to treat you not right. You reap what you sow. You were not good to people, now I'm not going to be good to you. Verse 9, for thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Sor. Now remember, Sor gets some. We just read Joel together. And also in Ezekiel, Sor is addressed. Like they get some. Where's Sor? Sor and Sidon. Northish on the Mediterranean coast of Israel in what would be modern day Jordan-ish? ? For thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Sor, and for 4, I do not turn it back. Notice it's 3 and 4. It's not the first time. It's the 3rd time. The 4th time you transgressed me. Now, you're going to get some. Because they surrendered in entire exile to Edom and did not remember the brotherly covenant. But I shall send fire upon the walls of Sor, and it shall consume its palaces. The brotherly covenant. Rabbi, what's the greatest command in all the Torah? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. And the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19, verse 18. That comes out of Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, I believe. So what's the brotherly covenant? All these nations around Israel that Yahweh is rebuking, they're all descendants of. Remember Noah? Right? Everybody remembers Noah. He built a giant boat, and then it rained for 40 days. And then one day he gets off the boat, he makes a fire, and then he gets drunk, and his son Ham castrates him, uncovers his nakedness. And he has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Well, Japheth goes to the north, up into Turkey, Aramea, Eastern Europe-ish area, arguably all the way up into Scandinavia. Shem was supposed to, and Shem is where we get Semite from, the Semitic peoples, Hebrews. Shem was supposed to have received essentially the Middle East. And Ham was supposed to have received essentially North Africa as his land grant, his inheritance. And Ham was of, the descendants of Ham were of corrupted flesh, arguably because his wife had fallen angel DNA in her. That's Genesis 6 verse 4 stuff. Go watch that video if you want more information on that. But Ham didn't do that. Ham went into the Middle East and took the land grant for Shem. And so there's corrupted flesh, fallen angel DNA in the Middle East, which is where a lot of these people groups come from that when in the end of Deuteronomy and then into the book of Joshua, where the Father says, go in there and put everybody under the ban. What does under the ban mean? It means kill everybody. Men, women, children. And we read that today and we think to ourselves, how could a loving God command the destruction of men, women, and children? You know, they were people just like we were. And that's the issue. They were not people just like we were. They were only part people. They were also part fallen angel, part abomination. They were not people like we were. And they were worshiping false gods, idols, sacrificing their children, engaged in whoring and idolatry and thievery, robbery, all the things that in Exodus 20, the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments, the Father tells us not to do, they were doing every day ritualistically as part of their existence. And they were not people, not like we are. They were corrupted flesh. And that's why the Father says, don't intermarry with them. Don't take their women as wives or concubines. Don't raise their children up. Have nothing to do with them. Go in there and utterly destroy them. Wipe them out. Well, Israel didn't do that. Not to the extent that the Father commanded them to do, and it has caused problems to this day. Wait a minute, Bear. Are you saying that the Palestinians of today are corrupted flesh from fallen angel DNA? Not necessarily. I'm not, so don't get that twisted. But I am saying that the Palestinians of today, this whole Israel versus Palestine war in the Middle East thing goes back 3,500 years, 4,000 years. And it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. And the Philistines that originally inhabited that area were biblically, genealogically descended from corrupted flesh. And that's why they and Israel don't get along. They've been commanded for 3,500 years to kill each other. And they're going to keep doing it. And we're not going to fix it. And the guy that does fix it, I would submit to you, is the Antichrist. So that's something to look out for. Well, we got off on a little tirade there, didn't we? And did not remember their brotherly covenant. And so this is Sor and Edom. The Edomites are the descendants of Esau, who was the brother of Jacob, Jacob. Remember, Esau sells his birthright for a pot of lentil stew, essentially, a bowl of lentil stew, essentially. Read Jasher, the book of the upright. Cross-reference there, because a lot of people are like, why would Esau give up his birthright for a bowl of lentils? It's because he had just lopped Nimrod's head off with a sword, and the most powerful army in the world was trying to find him and kill him, and he thought he was going to die anyway. What about Rachel and Leah? How come Jacob, who really wanted to marry Rachel, or Rachel, how come he ends up marrying Leah? How come Laban, Uncle Laban's discount wife emporium, when Jacob goes for a wife, Rachel, how come he ends up marrying Leah first? Well, because in the oral traditions, Rachel and Leah were twins, just like Esau and Jacob were twins, and Esau was the older, Leah was the older. They were betrothed to each other. Well, when Jacob took Esau's birthright, he took all the responsibility that went along with it as well, including being married to Leah. And that's why Jacob served 7 years for Leah first, and then another 7 years for Rachel, and then 6 more years under the bondage of Laban before they bug out. Different conversation, book of Genesis. But Edom and Jacob, Esau and Jacob are related. They are cousins. But Edom and Israel have not gotten along since Jacob and Esau days. Okay. And did not remember the brotherly covenant. But I shall send fire upon the walls of Sor, and it shall consume its palaces. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4 I do not turn it back, because he pursued his brother with the sword, and cast off all compassion. And his displeasure tore incessantly, and he kept his wrath forever. But I shall send fire upon Teman, and it shall consume the palaces of Botzrah. So these are named places in the district of Edom. Just like there's a pattern here. So it starts with the district or the land grant of Damasek, and then Sor, and then Edom, and then it names places, major cities, capitals, if you will, within these districts. So I shall send fire upon Teman, and it shall consume the palaces of Botzrah, district of Edom, the Edomites. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon, and for 4 I do not turn it back, because they ripped open the pregnant women in Gilead to enlarge their border. Are we allowed to diminish the inheritance of our brother? No, we're not. Well, how do we define brother? Well, Ammon is... Moab and Ammon are the sons of the daughters of Lot, going back to Genesis. Lot was the cousin of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They're in the family too. They're extended family. But if you've read the Old Testament, the Tanakh, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch, the Torah, they don't get along. They've never gotten along, the Moabites, the Ammonites. And Moab and Ammon raised up kings for themselves of the sons of the Anakim, who were also referred to as Rephaites. The Anakim are descendants of the Nephilim. The Nephilim are descendants again of those fallen angels. And so they willingly subjugated themselves to false leadership of corrupted flesh. Oh, sounds oddly like our governance today, doesn't it? So the children of Ammon, not good folks. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon, and for 4, I do not turn it back, because they ripped open the pregnant women of Gilead to enlarge their border. So I shall kindle a fire upon the wall of Rabbah, and it shall consume its palaces with a shout in the day of battle, with a storm in the day of the whirlwind. And their king shall go into exile, he and his heads together, said Yahweh. And all these people groups and cultures totally got the smoke. So as far as Amos being accurate in his prophecy, the answer is yes. And then chapter 2. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4, I do not turn it back, because he burned the bones of the king of Edom to lime. Now, again, Moab, descendant of Lot. Edom, and Lot, cousin of Abraham. Edom, brother of Israel, Jacob, Esau. They're cousins too. They're not supposed to be infighting like this. Well, who's my neighbor? Love my brother as myself. Who's my brother? These guys. They all share some of Abraham's DNA. They all share a region. They just don't share it well. Remember, Moab, the king of Moab, is the one, Balak, is the one who hired Balaam, the false prophet. Oh, there's that again. Just because you hear the words of Yahweh coming out of somebody's mouth, and even if they happen to come true, because remember, Balaam, he of the talking donkey, he tried to curse the children of Israel, and the messenger of Yahweh, capital M messenger, who's that? Yeshua, comes to Balaam and says, you don't say anything other than what I tell you to say. And what's interesting is the blessings that end up coming out of Balaam's mouth as he's trying to curse Israel are the exact triune blessing that the messenger of Elohim conveys to Abraham in Genesis. Yeah. And you shall possess the gates of your enemies, and your numbers will be like the sands of the seashore, and in you all the nations shall be blessed. That's what Balaam says, because there's unity of command here, unity of messaging, because Balaam says what the messenger of Elohim tells him to say, and the messenger of Elohim is the one who told that to Abraham in the first place. So just because Bible words are coming out of somebody's face doesn't make them a prophet. And Balaam all the way catches the smoke later on. Is it in the book of Numbers? Numbers 25 through 30-ish. Is where this Moabite thing goes down, where the king of Moab, Balak, is like, we can't take the Israelites, we can't take them in battle, so instead we'll send our whorish daughters down there and we'll intermarry with them, which we're not allowed to do. And so then they corrupt their flesh that way. And then you have Zimri and Cosby, who are fornicating either in front of or inside of the tabernacle, the tent of appointment, and that's where Phineas, jumps up with a spear, runs both of them through, skewers them, kills both of them in front of the congregation of the children of Israel to put a stop to the whoring. Because the whoring, there was a plague going around. I think it was 30,000 men dying in the plague. Check my numbers on that. It was a large amount of people dying in the plague. And then, so the Pinchas, who's in the line of the priesthood of Aaron, the father comes to Pinchas and says, I will make a covenant of peace with you forever. The guy who killed 2 people who were doing unrighteousness in the temple with a spear. And Yah says, love this guy. Awesome. Yeah, man, you're my boy forever. Covenant of peace with you forever. Everlasting covenant of peace, because you killed. Not like politely rebuked, love the sinner, hate the sin. Killed unrighteousness in the midst of the children of Israel. So the Moabites and the Israelites go way back. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Moab, and for 4 I do not turn it back, because he burned the bones of the king of Edom to lime. They killed the king of Edom. They're not supposed to do that. They're all cousins. Hey, y'all play nice. But I shall send fire upon Moab, and it shall consume the palaces of Kerioth. And Moab shall die amid uproar, with a cry and with the voice of a shofar. Shofars, battle, judgments, appointed times. And I shall cut off the judge from its midst, and kill all its heads with him, said Yahweh. and here's where things start to get interesting. Sip of coffee, everybody. Gosh, we're a half an hour in already, and I was like, man, these are 2 short chapters. It won't take that long. But all of y'all knew, everybody who's been here before, that we get new people every video, which is cool. Welcome, noobs. Good to see y'all. But everybody who's been here for approximately the last 6 years reading the Bible with us, you guys probably knew. You opened your Bible to Amos 1 and 2, and you're like, all right, 16 verses in 2, 15 verses in 1, 31 verses. That should take Bear approximately 60 to 90 minutes. Bless y'all. And I know a bunch of y'all. I read the comments, every comment on these videos. I appreciate them. The vast majority of them I appreciate. Occasionally, it's like whack-a-mole. Somebody sticks their head up and they get schwacked. But I know you guys love the rabbit holes. You love the deeper study, and I do too. I'm incapable of just spitting milk at y'all. And I don't think that helps anybody. I think that's a disservice, because if you're just going to read it parashat style, meaning literally what does it say, if that's all we're interested in is literally what does it say, without the remez, the drash, and the sod, you don't need me for that. And I don't need you for that. So I think it makes more sense. It's more spiritually profitable for all of us to dig a little bit deeper into these things, to understand the why behind what's going on here. Because book of Amos, 9 chapters long, in my research for the book of Amos, I found a lot of, well, actually a lot's not accurate. Several, because there's not a lot out there on the book of Amos. But what is out there is like 1-page blog articles and 6-minute YouTube videos on the book of Amos. It's like 6 minutes. So I had 6 minutes of preamble in this video. 6 minutes. That's it. There's plenty of milk. There's plenty of milk to go around. There's not enough meat. 32-ounce bone-in ribeyes. That's what we do here. Praise Elohim. Verse 4, speaking of bone-in ribeyes. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Judah. Judah, remember, the southern kingdom. The 2 houses, Ezekiel 37, and the 2 sticks bound together. The house of Israel, northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. 10.5, because nobody counts Levi. Poor Levi. Nobody counts Levi. And the southern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and approximately 2/3 of the Levites. So 2.67 tribes down south, 10.33 tribes up north. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I do not turn it back, because they have what? Rejected the Torah of Yahweh, and did not guard his laws. And their lies after which their fathers walked led them astray. But I shall send fire upon Judah, and it shall consume the palaces of Jerusalem. We could do an hour just on verse 4. Transgressions of Judah. First of all, again, for everybody who's like, Bear does Jewish stuff. No, I don't. I am not interested in what Rabbi Chaim ben Shmuel has to say on these things. To be perfectly frank, I'm not really interested in what Rabbi anybody has to say on these things. I believe in the doctrine of inerrancy, codified in 1977. Let the Bible interpret the Bible. It doesn't mean that there aren't interesting commentaries, especially when it comes to the Yehudim. They've been reading the Old Testament, the Torah, the prophets, the writings, for which is where you get the acronym Tanakh from. The Torah, the Netzavim, and the Ketuvim, I believe it is. Torah, prophets, writings, Tanakh. They've been reading it for 3,500 years, talking about it for 3,500 years. That's part of the problem, though, sometimes, too, being able to rightly divide, because I want to know what the Torah says. I want to know what Yah says. Not necessarily what Maimonides had to say on the subject. And so his commentary on the Torah, or anybody else's commentary on the Torah, or the prophets, or the writings, good to go. When they start adding their own Jewish BS to it, not good to go. Because that's why Yeshua rebukes the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the high priests. Literally, we're going to look at Matthew 23 in a moment. He calls them hypocrites. Because they're doing Jewish stuff, not Bible stuff. And I'm here for Bible stuff. Acknowledging that my Mashiach, my Messiah, is a man of the tribe of Judah. Okay, that's Matthew chapter 1. But that man, Yah made flesh of the tribe of Judah, went to the religious people and said, stop it. Stop doing your stuff. Start doing Yah's stuff again. And then Shaul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, picks that up in Colossians chapter 2, which we're going to go to because I have it in my notes. Galatians. I read Galatians. Paul says we don't have to do the Torah. That you didn't read it with understanding. For real, you didn't read it with understanding. Galatians is a doctorate level teaching on Torah. And if you're a kindergartner, you're not going to understand it. We've talked about this previously. If you read the Bible 2 hours per week, 2 hours per week, every Sunday religiously, you go and you spend 2 hours per week reading the Bible. Dwell time, it takes 1,260 hours for a kindergartner to graduate into first grade. Meaning your 2 hours a week of Bible study, it takes you 12 years and 40 days to graduate from kindergarten to first grade. And Paul's teaching at a doctorate level. So if you're in the second or third grade, and you're like, I read Galatians, Paul says, no, Paul is teaching at a doctorate level. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees of the tribe of Benjamin, and he holds himself blameless before Elohim and men always, never forsaken the Torah. Yeah, that's his own words in the book of Acts. But you read that, right? And not part of a guided Bible study or with your pastor on Sunday morning, but you read the whole book of Acts. Got it. Like every word of it. Because if you did, you'd stop saying that you can eat pork and shellfish and everything else because of Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10, which he absolutely clarifies in Acts chapter 11, in his own words, is not about food, it's about people. That's doctrines and dogmas. Colossians 2, verse 13, Shaul of Tarsus, Apostle Paul speaking. And you being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he, Yeshua, has made alive together with him, having forgiven all your trespasses. What are your trespasses? 1 John 3, verse 4, sin is lawlessness, and all who do sin do lawlessness. What else did Paul say? I knew not sin but by the law. Having blotted out that which was written by hand against us, man's hand. The Torah was written with the finger of Elohim. By the dogmas which stood against us. There's no dogmas in Torah. There's doctrines and dogmas in religion. And we're going to see when this wraps up in verse 22 here, that's exactly what we're talking about. Having blotted out that which was written by hand against us, by the dogmas which stood against us. Colossians chapter 2, verse 13. And he, Yeshua, has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the stake. What was nailed to the stake was religious BS, not the Torah. Having stripped the principalities and the authorities, these being the worldly religious principalities and authorities, not the Ephesians 6, nations and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. These being the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the high priests. Having stripped the principalities and the authorities, he, Yeshua, made a public display of them, having prevailed over them in it. Let no one, therefore, judge you in eating, or in drinking, or in respect of a festival, Leviticus 23, or a new moon, or Shabbat, the Sabbaths, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. Because your religious BS was nailed to the cross, the stake, the staros, let no one judge you when you eat or drink or respect the festivals and the new moons and Shabbat, which are a shadow of what is to come, but the body of Messiah. Let no one deprive you of the prize, one who takes delight in false humility and worship of angels, taking his stand on what he has not seen, puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, Yeshua, from whom all the body, us, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the growth of Elohim. Can you honestly tell me, in your religious doctrinal BS walk, that you're growing with the growth of Elohim? Because I played those games too. I've been in church since I was a little kid. I wasn't growing with the growth of Elohim. Not even a little bit. If then you died with Messiah because you were baptized in the name of Jesus, right? Baptized in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. If you died with Messiah from the elementary matters of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourself to dogmas? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which are all to perish with use according to the commands and teachings of men. We do not do commands and teachings of men. We do commands and teachings of Yah and Yahuwah, the Word and the Word made flesh. Back to Amos 2 verse 4. For thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Judah and for 4 I do not turn it back, because they have rejected the Torah of Yahweh and do not guard his laws, and their lies after which their father walked lead them astray. So Judah was not only engaged in pagan worship, but remember to this day that Pharisaical Judaism, rabbinical Judaism that we have today, directly ties back to, they're proud of it, they brag on it, directly ties back to Pharisaical Judaism, which is what Messiah was rebuking in his day and age. The Pharisees, the snitches that gave the king up to his government so that his government could conspire and kill him. Those guys. So beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Messiah warns us over and over again. Remember that these Yehudim today do not acknowledge Messiah at all. So they might know a thing or two about the Torah, and I'll give them that, but they don't know anything about Mashiach, and how they can't see him is ridiculous to me. Other than when Christians go to Jews and try and evangelize to Jews and say, you don't have to do the Torah anymore, it was nailed to the cross, the Jews instantly know, oh, that's BS, because the Torah is forever. But that's because Christians don't read their own Bible. They didn't read Matthew 5:17, where Messiah himself said, until heaven and earth pass away, which has not happened yet, not one yod, not one jot, not one tittle shall fall from the Torah till all be done. And newsflash, homie, not all has be done yet. In fact, what is his name? Rabbi somebody. Rabbi Joseph Mizrachi, Mizrachi, has a very interesting debate with an evangelical Christian about Messiah, and under the guise of trying to find common ground between their two faiths. But the first question he asks, he comes right out of the gate. And that this poor evangelical guy, I wish I had been there personally. And I've actually reached out to Rabbi Mizrachi, and I'd love to have a conversation with him, especially on camera. So Rabbi, if you're watching, get at me, admin@barondependent.com. The first question Mizrachi asks him is, if your Mashiach said that the Torah is not done away with and will never be done away with, why do you not keep Torah? And Mr. Evangelical guy didn't have an answer for it. And Mizrachi right there goes, well, if your Messiah is lawless, then he's not Messiah. He's not the Messiah of the Jews. And he's right. Because the man of lawlessness is the Antichrist, and lawlessness is the working of Satan. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 in the words of Paul. All right, I think we've foot stomped that enough. We've spent 15 minutes there. Amos 2 verse 4. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Judah and for 4 I do not turn it back, because they have rejected the Torah of Yahweh and did not guard his laws. And their lies after which their fathers walked led them astray. But I shall send fire upon Judah, and it shall consume the palaces of Jerusalem. Assyrian exile, 721 BC, approximately 40 to 45 years after Amos wrote this. Some guy herding sheep in Tekoa, on the border between the southern and the northern kingdoms. He was right. Yah was right, who spoke through a lowly shepherd. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4 I do not turn it back, because, and this is so interesting. Sorry, Yah, I don't mean to interrupt you. But the reasons here that Israel catches some smoke that we see in verses 7 and 8, there's a huge compare-contrast here between Yeshua and the teachings of Yeshua and the model that he gave us and the reason that Israel catches the smoke. Thus said Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4 I do not turn it back, because they sell the righteous for silver and the poor for a pair of sandals, who crush the head of the poor ones in the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the meek. And a man and his father go into the same girl to defile my set-apart name. And they lie down by every slaughter place on garments taken in pledge, and in the house of their mighty ones they drink the wine of those who have been fined. Yet I destroyed the Amorites before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks, yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. And I brought you up from the land of Mitzrayim and led you for 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. And I raised up some of your sons as prophets, and some of your young men as Nazirites. Not so, O you children of Israel, declares Yahweh. But you made the Nazirites drink wine and commanded the prophets, saying, do not prophesy. See, I am weighed down by you, as a wagon is weighed down when filled with sheaves. And a place to flee shall perish from the swift, and the strong not fortify his power, and the mighty not save his life. And he who handles the bow not stand, and the swift of foot not save, nor he who rides a horse save his life. And the one potent of his heart among the mighty flee naked in that day, declares Yahweh. For 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4 I do not turn it back, because they sell the righteous for silver. Yeshua was sold for silver, 30 pieces. Which isn't even per the Torah. There's transgression in that on behalf of Judas, Yehuda Iscariot, and the high priests, the priesthood. They sold him for the wrong price. Read the Torah. That's not what a manservant goes for. They did, and so the implication there, the high priest didn't even know the Torah. 30 pieces isn't enough. I believe it's 50 pieces of silver for a man. And the poor for a pair of sandals. What did John Yochanan the Baptist say? I'm not worthy to touch his sandal strap. Who crushed the head of the poor ones in the dust of the earth. Yeshua ministered to the poor. And if you read the commentaries on Amos today, they make a huge deal out of essentially what they title social justice. How that Amos was talking about social justice back in the day. More so, we are commanded to forsake not the widow and the orphan, and there's a literal command in the Torah that says, let none among you be poor. And so Israel had prioritized their own wealth, their own well-being, their own comfort over loving their neighbor as themselves. What does Yeshua say? I come first, but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Who crush the head of the poor ones in the dust of the earth and turn aside the way of the meek. Turn aside the way of the meek. Then hear Yeshua. And a man and his father go into the same girl to defile my set-apart name. How are they defiling Yah's set-apart name when they do that? Very simple. They claim the name of Yahweh, and then they act like that. They are telling the entire world that's what it looks like to be a follower of Yah. Which, do not take the Lord's name in vain, doesn't mean don't say GD. It means don't put his stamp of approval on your BS. And that's exactly what they did here in verse 7. Cross-reference, in the words of Paul, 1 Corinthians 5. It is commonly reported that there is whoring among you, and such whoring as is not even named among the nations, so as one to have his father's wife. And you've been puffed up and did not rather mourn, so that he who has done this deed be removed from among you. And a man and his father go into the same girl to defile my set-apart name. And they lie down by every slaughter place. Every slaughter place. There's one place we're supposed to slaughter per the Torah. You bring all your offerings to the temple. Not to the high places, not to the evergreen trees, not to the asherim, the sun pillars, the phalluses, the steeples as they call them today. Obelisks, because that's what they are. To slaughter to Baal and Chemosh and all the other abominations. No. The high places, all these different slaughter places, were pagan worship, pagan idolatry, rather than going to the temple. And in the house of their mighty one. Oh, and garments. They take garments in pledge. Doesn't Yeshua talk about if you take your brother's garment in pledge, give it back to him so that he's not cold at night? And in the house of their mighty one, they drink the wine of those who have been fined. The house of their mighty one. How did they end up with a house of their mighty one in Israel? They're supposed to be Yah's people. They drink the wine of those who have been fined. Yet I destroyed the Amorites before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars. Read Deuteronomy 2, by the way, cross-reference here. All the giants in the land that Yahweh and the Israelites smoked together, utterly destroyed them. Deuteronomy 2 is very confidence-inspiring. It's uplifting to me. It's like, oh, there's giants in the way? Yeah, Yah's in the business of slaughtering giants for his people. Cool. Coffee down the hatch. Yet I destroyed the Amorites before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars. And he was as strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots from beneath. Wiped him out. And at the coming of the Son of Man, it shall be like unto the days of Noah. Bear, will there be corrupted flesh when Yeshua returns? 100%. That's what he's saying. What are we going to do? Hey, newsflash. Giants bleed and giants die. Don't be a wussy. David took Goliath down with a rock and then cut his head off with his own sword. We have a pattern of behavior here. And the second coming of Messiah is in the biblical Old Testament line of prophecies of Mashiach ben David, the righteous king in the line of King David. Songs were written about the tens of thousands that David killed in battle, including many, many giants. And David had his own special forces, his 43 men, the 40 and the 3. And amongst them, they killed dozens of giants and tens of thousands of heathens in battle. And that's the spirit that Messiah is returning in. No, my Jesus would never do that. Well, sweetie, your Jesus is make-believe. Go read Revelation 19. Because when Yeshua HaMashiach returns, he slaughters everybody that's not on Team Yeshua. Because his first coming, your Jesus that you identify with, was Mashiach ben Yosef, the suffering servant who suffers and atones for his people. The second coming is Mashiach ben David, Messiah in the line of King David. And there's a couple hundred Old Testament prophecies on that. Bear, what are they? Google. Do the research. Do the homework. Maybe at some point we'll do a standalone video on that. But right now, we still have Bible to read. And by the time, maybe, that we finish this, when we find ourselves back in Matthew chapter 1 again, then maybe we'll begin to do standalone videos there. But in actuality, what's likely to happen is I'm going to do the Torah portions on YouTube. I've already got them up pre-recorded on Patreon for the men's group on Patreon. But see, we still have this much of the Bible left to read together before I even consider doing standalone videos on things like that. Old Testament prophecies of Messiah. In the meanwhile, there's other sources, other references on that. Messiah, when he returns, why does he come twice? It's exactly in the pattern of a Hebrew wedding. First, the man goes, and he goes to the bride. The bridegroom goes to the bride, and he issues her a ketubah, a contract, a covenant. And then he leaves, and he goes to his father's house, and he prepares an addition or a room on the house for his wife. And he continues to prepare it until his father says, your work is done. Go get your wife. Then he goes back. Then he takes the wife, brings her to the room, and they consummate the relationship, and the two become one flesh. And if she's a betula, a virgin, notice I didn't say maiden. That's an entirely different conversation. Oh. For those that want to argue that point, I highly recommend you get this book. Gospel of the Holy 12. Master Gospel of John, translated from the original Aramaic. What am I saying there? I'm saying that the earliest manuscripts don't say anything about Mary being a virgin. That's what I'm saying. But, oh, wait a minute. That's sacrilege. It's not a matter of salvation, and it's not a point I want to argue, but it's something that I've had to check in my spirit over for a couple of decades. She came to be pregnant by the Holy Spirit, but I would submit she came to be pregnant by the Holy Spirit the same way everybody else on planet Earth has ever come to be pregnant. The man and the woman come together and become one flesh. Oh, well then why did Joseph want to put her away? Because they consummated the relationship before they had the ceremony. Ketubah was in place, then you're supposed to have the ceremony, then you consummate the relationship. But they got it out of order, which is why the angel Gabriel comes to Joseph and says, hey, don't worry, this is of Yah. Don't put her away, don't shame her. Because Joseph was a righteous man. Well, what does righteous mean? Blamelessly walking in the commands of Yahweh your Elohim. Luke chapter 1 verse 6. And he's like, I think I might have ruined this woman's reputation. Because she's going to be pregnant and she's going to be showing that she's pregnant before we have the ceremony. What if I just put her away? And so the reason that Messiah comes twice is it's in the same exact pattern as a Hebrew bride and bridegroom and bride. And we know Yeshua is the bridegroom and we are the bride. That's why he comes twice. First to establish the covenant, the ketubah, and then second to consummate the relationship. That's why Yeshua says, in my Father's house there are many rooms, and no man knows the day or the hour but my Father in heaven. Because he doesn't come back for his bride until the Father says, hey, you're done building the house. Anyway, verse 10. Yeah, I know, I just pissed a bunch of y'all off. It's not my intention to piss anybody off. It's my intention to, again, provide meat on a platter that you can take and eat if you're willing to do so. I'm not here to tickle anybody's ears. I'm here to read the Bible and do what it says. And I've done it alone before. I'll do it alone again. I don't want contention. But I'm also not going to say things just to gain the approval of men. I don't care about the approval of men. My goal is at the end of an age to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. That's it. And that doesn't come from you. It comes from Messiah. That's what I'm trying to do. And I'll also tell you this. There's 100% chance I'm wrong about at least some of this. I don't know all this stuff. And if I am wrong, I'll admit it. If new information comes to light, I'll admit it. But I know that I'm not perfect at this. I know that I'm not. It takes a lifetime to begin to have a grasp of this word. So in the meanwhile, as Pastor Joe Fox at Viking Preparedness would say, do the best you can with what you got where you're at. And that's what I'm trying to do. Not for your approval, for the Father's approval. And it's the same reason why I tell you, you should have your Bible out and you should read these things with your own eyes, and you should pray over it and beg the Father to send his Ruach HaKodesh, his Holy Spirit, for wisdom and discernment while you read his word, you and him together. No, do not just take my word for it. And I brought you up from the land of Mitzrayim and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. And I raised up some of your sons as prophets and some of your young men as Nazirites. Not so, O children of Israel, declares Yahweh. But you made the Nazirites drink wine. Numbers chapter 6, set apart unto Yahweh. They're not supposed to have grapes. They're not supposed to have wine. They're not supposed to have strong drink. They're not supposed to cut their hair. But the Israelites didn't want to hear what the prophets had to say. They didn't want to hear what the Nazirites had to say. They didn't want to hear the word of Elohim, so they shut those guys down. But you made the Nazirites drink wine and commanded the prophets, saying, do not prophesy. Mattiyahu, chapter 23. Shall we? Yes, we shall. Matthew 23, starting in verse 23. Yeshua speaking. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you tithe the mint and the anise and the cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. These needed to have been done without neglecting the others. Messiah just told them, A, screw your religious BS. B, keep the Torah. Blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they are filled with plunder and unrighteousness. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, so that the outside then becomes clean too. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like whitewashed tombs. And see, Christendom takes this to mean an outright rejection of the Torah, because it doesn't understand the Torah. No, this is an outright rejection of religion, saying return to the Torah. You have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. These needed to have been done without neglecting the others. You should be doing the Torah, especially the weightier matters of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. You can have belief in Torah. I thought, faith versus works. Yeah, Book of James. Faith is what you do. What you do is your works. I will know your faith by your works. We're not justified by our works. The works are de facto. They're understood. If you believe in Messiah and his entire ministry is the removal of sin from your life, wouldn't it beg the question, what is sin? 1 John 3 verse 4, sin is lawlessness. To which Shalom of Tarsus said, I knew not sin but by the law. I didn't know what not to do until I knew the law. Simple as that. Do not sin. Do not be lawless. AKA, do the law. Double negative is a positive, right? Do not be lawless. Do the law. I thought we didn't have to do that because we're under grace now. By grace through faith we are saved, lest any man should boast. Yes, the grace is per the law. You should be dead for your transgressions, but you're not. Yeshua took that upon himself to remove sin, lawlessness, from your life. To which Paul says, shall we sin all the more so that grace may abound? No, God forbid you continue to be lawless. because you've already experienced the mercy of having the death penalty removed from you, which is why James says, for those who looked into the perfect Torah, that of freedom, you're free from the curse of death from the Torah because of Messiah. But it doesn't mean you don't have to keep doing the Torah, because God said to do it, and Messiah is God, and God doesn't change. Malachi 3 verse 6. It is impossible for a biblical Messiah to change the words of Elohim. And the man of lawlessness, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, read it, is the Antichrist. And lawlessness literally is the working of Satan. Preaching that the law is done away with is the working of Satan. Because, to quote Paul directly, they did not receive the love of the truth by which they would be saved. Matthew 19 verse 17. Master, what do I do to have everlasting life? Keep the commands. Oh, Jesus said that? Yeah, Matthew 19, verse 17. If you wish to enter into life, keep the commands. And then the guy says, which ones? And he literally quotes Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. Yeah. And you're not going to do it perfectly, which is why you have a Messiah. But you need to try. Because trying is proof of the belief that you have a Messiah. Because his righteousness is our righteousness. You don't get credit for him walking it perfectly. You get intercession for him walking it perfectly. And you get a model to walk after. How do I do it? What would Jesus do? Keep Torah. That's what he would do. Because in him there is no sin, and sin is lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly indeed look well, but inside are filled with dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. You're filled with what? This is Messiah speaking. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Outwardly, you indeed appear righteous to men, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. Did he just rebuke the Pharisees because they're filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness? Yes, he did. Don't be a Pharisee. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would have not taken part with them in the blood of the prophets. Thus you bear witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who did murder the prophets, and you fill up the measure of your fathers. Serpents, brood of adders, how would you escape the judgment of Gehenna, the place of the dead? Because of this, see, I send you prophets, and what? I. Who sent the prophets? Elohim. So how did Yeshua send the prophets? He is Elohim made flesh. And Malachi 3 verse 6, I'm the Lord Yahweh Sabaoth, I change not. Meaning Messiah cannot change the words of Elohim. If he does, then he's not Messiah. Which is why, again, our Jewish friends will not receive the witness of the Christians, because the Christians' entire ministry has become, well, Jesus changed what God said. Nope. No, he didn't. Well, then why are they taught that? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The working of lawlessness is the working of Satan. They are under a strong delusion because they did not receive the love of the truth by which they would be saved. Because of this, see, I send you the prophets and wise men and scholars of Scripture. Some of them you shall kill and impale, and some of them you shall flog in your congregations and persecute from city to city, so that on you should come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the dwelling place and the slaughter place. Truly, I say to you, this shall come upon this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who were sent to her. How often I wish to gather your children the way a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, but you would not. See, your house is left to you laid waste. For I say to you, from now on you shall by no means see me until you say, blessed is he who is coming in the name of Yahweh. Who is coming in the name of who? Blessed is he who is coming in the name of Yahweh. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets. Back to Amos, chapter 2. And I raised up some of your sons as prophets, and some of your young men as Nazarites. Not so, O children of Israel, declares Yahweh, but you made the Nazarites drink wine, and commanded the prophets, saying, do not prophesy. See, I am weighed down by you, as a wagon is weighed down when filled with sheaves. And a place to flee, and now we get into some Matthew 24 imagery here. And a place to flee shall perish from the swift. Shut up, phone. I'm awake. I've been awake for 3 hours, phone. Appreciate you. And a place to flee shall perish from the swift. And let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And the strong shall not fortify his power. He who seeks to save his life shall lose it. And the mighty not save his life. And he who handles the bow not stand. And the swift of foot not save. Nor he who rides a horse save his life. And the one potent of his heart among the mighty flee naked. See that you keep your clothes, and you know no shame. That's from Revelation. That actually goes all the way back to the high priest and the priesthood. And the one potent of his heart among the mighty flee naked in that day, declares Yahweh. Hold on, Bear. What's the naked thing? Well, we'll end with that. In the temple, they had morning and evening sacrifices. And each one had to be completely burnt up so that the next one could be performed. Well, in the night shift, in the evening, it was the priest's job. See, there's the high priest and then a legion of priests around the high priest that supported the works of the temple. And the priest on duty at night would have to make sure that the fire was tended and that the offering was completely consumed so that in the morning there was nothing but ashes so that the next lamb could be slaughtered. To which a lot of people go, well, that's stupid. Jesus is my offering. Yeah, now. But don't sleep on the substitutionary sacrificial offerings of the Levitical priesthood, because without the substitutional sacrificial offerings of the Levitical priesthood, when Yeshua hung upon the stake and said, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, which is Leviticus chapter 5, you wouldn't have atonement for your sin. A sacrifice costs you something. That's the entire story of Cain and Abel. And so the priest on the night shift, his job was to make sure the offering was completely consumed. But oftentimes they would fall asleep. Fall asleep on watch. That's why Yeshua says, therefore wait and be watchful. And so the high priest would sneak in like a thief in the night, sneak into the temple. Right? Behold, I come swiftly like a thief in the night, because Yeshua is the high priest. Hebrews chapter 8. Sorry, that's my gun squeaking on my leather chair. Tell me you're neurodivergent without telling me you're neurodivergent. So the priest would sneak in like a thief in the night, and if he found the priest tending the night offering asleep, he would heap coals upon his lap. He would take a bowl and pick up fire, coals from the fire, and throw it on the lap of the sleeping priest. Their garments were made of linen. Literally, when the worn out garments of the priest, or when the garments were no longer serviceable, they would literally take them and cut them into strips and use them as wicks for the lamps in the temple. They're flammable. And so the high priest, Yeshua, would heap coals in the lap of the priest who's asleep. Us, because we're commanded to be a nation of kings and priests. Exodus 19 verse 6, Revelation 1 verse 6. I'm not a priest. Every one of us men is priest of our home at a minimum. Abraham was called a prince of Elohim. You're the sons of Abraham. Act like it. It's not my job. Okay, cool. Victor Bravos. Vineyard boys. Yeah, it's a different portion of the Torah. You don't take the tender-hearted to war. You can stay back and tend the garden. Okay. And so the priest would heap hot coals in the lap of the sleeping priest, and the priest would wake up with his garments on fire, and he would have to strip naked or catch fire himself. Where is that? Blessed is he who keeps his garments and knows no shame, is what Yeshua says in Revelation. And that's where that comes from. Keeping your garments means you weren't caught being asleep as the offering was being made. And you weren't burned up. And so you kept your garments. You didn't have to walk home naked. Because everybody knew that guy's a priest, and everybody knew the priest was naked. They knew that he had fallen asleep on watch. And we don't want to be caught sleeping on watch. And the one potent of his heart among the mighty flee naked in that day, declares Yahweh. Don't be asleep in your offerings made to Elohim, or the high priest will catch you and heap coals in your lap and burn you up. That's Amos 1 and 2. Only took us an hour and 16 minutes. I appreciate y'all. Have a blessed day. Shalom.